Всім добрий вечір.
On behalf of the brave.
On behalf of every father and every mother
Who waits for freedom. On behalf of our
warriors and paves the way for a new history.
Hello and welcome to Tochnyi Weekly, the show that gets behind the headlines to discuss the Russian invasion of Ukraine. A lot of stuff happened this week, guys. So we got the whole gang together to talk. So glad to see everyone. Hi, hope everyone in chat's doing well. We have a great show for you today. If you could, please do hit the like button, and if you haven't already, subscribe to Tochnyi. It really helps us out, helps spread the word. We also post on social media on Twitter and BlueSky. So if you want to follow what we're publishing and stuff, it might be good to follow us there. And then, of course, we have our crown jewel, our website, Tochnyi.info. There's all kinds of research and interactive maps and cool stuff up there. So, we've got a new article published in the last couple weeks, and there's a new interactive map up there that Stanimir and a couple colleagues have been working on. Check out Tochnyi.info. It's a great resource, and there's a lot of people working real hard on there. Chat, good to see you, as I said. If you guys have any questions about the broadcast or about the topics we discuss, you're welcome to post them, and we'll do our best to address all the stuff in chat towards the end. Show order this week, I'll present the news. That'll be followed by German aid to Ukraine's report. Then we'll get Stanimir's report on the Russian economy. We'll discuss a little bit about what's going on politically in Ukraine, and then Q&A. So without any further delay, I will now present the news. These are the main headlines as of July 26th, 2026. First up, we have operations. A Ukrainian F-16 fighter jet has recorded its first confirmed victory against another aircraft in aerial combat, bringing down a Russian fighter during an engagement in the air. The chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, disclosed the development while testifying before the U.S. Senate. He did not identify the model of Russian aircraft or provide details about where or when the encounter occurred. The general said Ukraine had substantially improved its air defense capabilities over the past several years with assistance from international partners. Those improvements have created a more developed, layered defensive network and have allowed the Ukrainian Air Force to use fighter aircraft more effectively. The aircraft involved may have been a Russian Su-35 that was lost during Ukrainian military action on July 8, 2026. A Russian pro-war Telegram channel reported at the time that Ukrainian forces were responsible for the loss of the aircraft. The channel also said that the Russian pilot survived and was later recovered. The Ukrainian Air Force uses its F-16s for several different types of mission. The aircraft intercept incoming missiles and drones, engage hostile aircraft, and conduct precision attacks against targets on the ground with guided weapons. Ukraine is expected to receive approximately 100 F-16s in total. Most of the aircraft are being supplied by European countries. Norway, Belgium, Denmark, and the Netherlands are transferring fighters previously operated by their own air forces after refurbishment and modernization work. Ukrainian forces struck the Avatech defense plant in the Russian city of Kyiv on the morning of July 24th using a Flamingo cruise missile. Footage recorded after the attack showed smoke rising from the area of the facility. The video was published by the Exile Nova Plus Telegram channel. The use of the Flamingo missile was confirmed by the co-owner and chief designer of Firepoint, the Ukrainian company associated with the weapon. He later released separate footage showing the missile being launched. Residents of Kyiv reported hearing explosions around 7 a.m. Smoke was seen near the Avatech plant, and people in the area recorded videos of the aftermath on their phones. Initial information suggested that the missile struck one of the central buildings inside the industrial complex. The full extent of the damage is not currently known. The Vyatka machine-building enterprise Avatech is based in Kyiv and operates as part of the Almaz Ante Air and Space Defense Corporation. Avatech is the only company in Russia that mass produces ejection seats for every type of Russian fighter and ground attack aircraft. It also manufactures equipment used to load and secure cargo on aircraft. This includes winches, hoists, and suspension racks installed beneath aircraft. The plant is also involved in the production of surface-to-air guided missiles and manufactures target missiles and airborne devices used to imitate hostile aircraft during training and weapons testing. Avatech has been placed under sanctions by the United States, the European Union, Ukraine, Canada, Switzerland, and New Zealand. The restrictions were imposed because of the company's role in supplying parts and equipment to Russia's military manufacturing sector. Ukraine's unmanned systems forces struck 13 vessels linked to Russia's Shadow Fleet in the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov between July 21st and 22nd. The commander said the drones were used against 10 dry cargo ships, 1 oil tanker, and 2 tugboats. He said the Ukrainian units had targeted 196 vessels over the previous 17 days. The ships were described as carrying oil, fuel, and other goods in breach of international sanctions imposed on Russia. Of the vessels targeted during the campaign, 126 were in the Sea of Azov as part of an operation known as Malachka. Another 70 were struck in the Black Sea. During the same period, the unmanned systems forces also attacked energy infrastructure in Russian-held areas of Ukraine. This included 13 power plants and electrical substations in Crimea, along with 2 similar facilities elsewhere in occupied territory. The commander also said that Ukrainian operations had reduced the capacity of the Kerch ferry crossing by about 75% over the previous 2 weeks. Before the attacks began, 4 ferries regularly transported vehicles and cargo between the port of Kavkaz and the port of Crimea. A 5th vessel was held in reserve at the port of Kerch. Around 80% of the traffic handled by the crossing was used to support the Russian military. Before the Ukrainian operation, the ferries transported roughly 180 to 250 vehicles per day. Up next, we have economy and aid. The International Monetary Fund has completed the first review of its 4-year program for Ukraine and approved the immediate release of about $690 million. Total payments under this program will now reach approximately $2.2 billion. Ukraine met all performance targets set for the end of March, but missed its June target for net international reserves, partly because of economic disruption linked to the war in the Middle East. Several structural reforms were also delayed or left incomplete. Ukrainian authorities agreed to corrective measures and new deadlines to address the problem. The IMF warned against reversing progress and called for timely reforms in taxation, public finance, governance, anti-corruption policy, energy, state-owned companies, and the financial sector. The fund said Ukraine's economy remains resilient but faces a weaker outlook because of intensified attacks on critical infrastructure and external economic pressures. GDP growth is expected to slow from 1.8% last year to between 1 and 1.6% this year, before rising to 3.5% next year. Inflation is forecast to reach 10.5% this year and ease to 8% next year. Unemployment is expected to fall from 10.2% this year before increasing to 11.3% next year. The IMF said the program remains fully financed through international support, including the European Commission's $90 billion Ukraine support loan, G20 financing, and bilateral assistance. Ukraine's major official creditors have also extended the suspension of debt payments. Ukraine's budget deficit, excluding grants, is expected to narrow from 23.5% of GDP last year to 21.1% this year and 17.8% next year. Public debt is projected to peak at 111.8% of GDP next year. International reserves are forecast to rise from $57.3 billion to $65.5 billion this year and $66 billion next year. The IMF said consistent reform implementation will remain essential for financial stability, continued foreign funding, and progress toward European Union membership. The Irish government has announced a new €125 million assistance package for Ukraine. The decision was presented during a visit to Kyiv by the Irish Prime Minister, who met with the Ukrainian president. The package includes €100 million for military equipment that is not designed for direct offensive use. Another $25 million will support the repair and protection of Ukraine's energy infrastructure. The new funding adds to equipment already supplied by the Irish Armed Forces. Previous contributions have included vehicles, satellite communications equipment, and Giraffe Mark IV radar systems. Plans to deliver the radar systems were announced on October 14th of last year. Following the latest package, the total value of Irish assistance provided to Ukraine will exceed €670 million. The Irish Foreign Affairs and Trade Minister said that support for Ukraine would be a central priority during Ireland's presidency of the European Union. The Irish government also approved the possible deployment of peacekeeping personnel without requiring prior approval from the United Nations. European Union ambassadors agreed on the bloc's 21st sanctions package against Russia on July 23rd after several delays caused by objections from Greece. The measures had not yet received final approval from EU ministers when the agreement was announced. The vote is expected to take place through a written procedure and is widely regarded as a formality. The package is known to be less extensive than the European Commission's original proposal. An EU diplomat said the negotiations had been difficult, but member states had resolved the remaining disputes while preserving agreement among all 27 countries. One major part of the Commission's proposal remained unchanged. The EU agreed to hold the price limit on Russian oil at $44 per barrel for 12 months. The EU's oil cap system normally keeps the permitted sale price below the international market rate. However, the formula can allow the ceiling to increase when global oil prices rise. Energy prices had climbed after the United States began military action against Iran in February. Without the new agreement, the permitted price for Russian oil could have increased to $58 per barrel. By fixing the ceiling at $44 for the next year, the EU will prevent the limit from rising during that period, even if energy markets remain unstable. European officials expect the measure to reduce the amount of oil revenue available to Russia. The package also preserved almost all of the approximately 250 individuals and organizations proposed for inclusion on the sanctions list by the European External Action Service. This would represent the largest number of new listings included in a single EU sanctions package since 2022. Other proposed restrictions on Russia's banking system and cryptocurrency activity were retained without substantial changes. The president of the European Commission welcomed the agreement and highlighted the planned addition of 32 Russian banks to the sanctions list. She also said the EU would, for the first time, impose measures against vessels that assist Russia's shadow fleet. A plan to introduce trade restrictions on Russian fish was dropped entirely after agreement could not be reached on the proposal. Another proposal that would have effectively prevented Russian military personnel from entering the EU was also postponed. The ambassadors instead agreed on language committing the bloc to consider such measures later. Bulgaria is known to have prevented Patriarch Kirill, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church and former KGB agent, from being added to the list of sanctioned individuals. Austria obtained concessions involving Raiffeisen Bank, which has continued operating in Russia since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Greece secured a compromise on restrictions intended to prevent European companies from transferring Russian liquefied natural gas to countries outside the EU. Under the compromise, contracts signed before Russia began its full-scale invasion will be allowed to continue. Those arrangements will be reviewed every year. Companies will not be permitted to expand the existing contracts or sign new ones. This concession caused Greece to withdraw its veto and enabled ambassadors to approve the package. Up next, we have international relations. The Ukrainian president has appointed Major General Mikhailo Drapati as the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, replacing Alexander Syrsky. Syrsky had led the military since February of 2024, when he took over after Valery Zaluzhny was removed from the position. By mid-July 2026, people close to the presidential office were reporting that Zelensky was seriously considering another change in command. The discussion followed the dissolution of the previous government, which also resulted in the defense minister losing his position only months after his appointment in January. The former minister said that he had clashed with Syrsky and had pressed Zelensky to dismiss him, but the president had initially refused. The defense minister Fedorov's removal prompted demonstrations in several Ukrainian cities. Protesters called for his return and Syrsky's departure, as well as broader changes within the military. A person close to the presidential administration said that officials had not expected such a strong public response. Although the former minister's reinstatement appeared highly unlikely, replacing Syrsky remained a realistic possibility. 11 candidates were reportedly considered for the role. Zelensky also attempted to bring the former defense minister back into government by offering him several other positions. However, Fedorov was prepared to return only if he regained control of the defense ministry. The head of the Security Service of Ukraine is currently serving as the acting defense minister. Shortly before Syrsky's dismissal became public, Zelensky met again with the former defense minister. Syrsky issued a statement on July 22nd describing the condition of the military he was leaving to his successor. He said that the force had progressed from conducting a difficult defensive campaign 2 years earlier to carrying out offensive operations. He said that the armed forces were not only maintaining their positions, but had gained greater initiative, organization, and personnel capable of effectively striking Russian forces. He expressed hope that offensive activity would continue and said the necessary foundations were already in place. Drapati served as the deputy commander of the Joint Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, and he became commander of the ground forces in November of 2024. In June of 2025, Drapati submitted his resignation after a Russian missile struck a military training unit in the Dnipropetrovsk region. 12 service members lost their lives and more than 60 others were wounded. Drapati said at the time that he was accepting personal responsibility for the incident and acknowledged that he had failed to ensure that his orders were fully followed and he had not done enough to change how commanders treated the safety of personnel under their authority. He argued that a functioning military requires the commanders to accept direct responsibility for the lives of their troops. In his first public address after being appointed the commander-in-chief, Drapati thanked Zelensky for placing confidence in him. He also recognized Syrsky's work to strengthen the military and noted that he had advanced through the ranks while serving under Syrsky's command. Ukraine's ambassador to the UK, the former commander-in-chief Valery Zaluzhny, also responded positively to the appointment. Zaluzhny said Drapati was taking on an exceptionally difficult responsibility, likely more demanding than he currently understood. He described him as an honorable person who would have no reason to feel ashamed of his conduct. He added that Drapati is not guided by personal idols or political attachments and therefore had little to protect beyond his responsibility to fulfill his duty. UNESCO has added the ancient city of Tara-Chersonese and its Chora in occupied Crimea to the list of World Heritage Sites in danger. Chersonesus Tarica was an ancient Greek settlement founded by colonists in the 6th century BC on the territory of present-day Sevastopol. It was added to the UNESCO World Heritage List in 2013 and remains the only site in Crimea with that international designation. Since Russia's occupation of Crimea in 2014, Ukrainian authorities have documented the removal of cultural objects from Chersonesus and other archaeological sites across the peninsula. Ukraine's military intelligence has reported unauthorized excavations and the transfer of artifacts into Russian control. By late 2025, the Stolen Heritage section of Ukraine's War and Sanctions database contained information on 178 cultural items taken from occupied Crimea. Objects removed from Chersonesus have included frescoes, pottery, religious icons, and items used in everyday life. Many were transferred to museums in Russia. Large-scale Russian construction and excavation work at the site has reportedly exposed as many as 500,000 artifacts. Ukrainian experts say the work was conducted without authorization from Ukraine and without sufficient protection for the archaeological layers beneath the complex. Chersonesus also has considerable religious and political importance. According to tradition, the medieval Kievan prince Volodymyr was baptized there in 988. Russian state ideology presents that event as the beginning of Russian Orthodox Christianity and uses it to support the idea of a single historical identity linking Russia and Ukraine. The Russian president has personally supported the redevelopment of the area into a major museum and park project. The complex, known as New Chersonesus, opened in July of 2024 on land connected to the ancient settlement. The development includes several museums, a park centered on Christian themes, an outdoor theater, and reconstructed historical districts. Russian authorities have promoted it as a representation of Orthodox culture and Russian civilization. To build the complex, archaeologists and construction crews working under Russian authority excavated previously untouched layers of the ancient city. Ukrainian specialists say the work permanently disrupted the original archaeological setting. The new attraction had received about 700,000 visitors as of October 2024. A large number of people moving through the site placed additional pressure on the fragile remains below the surface. Ukrainian experts describe the project as a modern entertainment and ideological complex constructed over the remains of an internationally protected Ukrainian heritage site. UNESCO called for stronger international cooperation to prevent artifacts originating in occupied Crimea from being circulated, sold, or transferred through foreign markets and institutions. And last item this week, a Romanian Air Force F-16 used an air-to-air missile to bring down a drone that entered Romanian airspace on July 24. It is the first known case in which one of Romania's F-16 fighters fired a weapon against an unauthorized drone over the country. The Romanian president said the interception occurred around 11 a.m. over an area without residents. Because there were no civilians nearby, the pilot was able to engage the aircraft without creating a significant risk to people on the ground. Specialist teams from the relevant Romanian agencies were sent to inspect the location where the drone came down. Their work was intended to establish the circumstances of the incident and to recover material that could help identify the aircraft. The Romanian Ministry of National Defense said the drone was first detected at 9:39 a.m. and it was approximately 20 kilometers east of Sulina, a city in the Danube Delta near Romania's border with Ukraine. After being detected, the drone crossed into Romanian airspace and traveled inland. 4 fighter aircraft were deployed to intercept it. 2 Italian Air Force Eurofighter Typhoons and Romania launched 2 F-16 fighters from the 86 airbase. Romanian fighter aircraft have previously responded to Russian drones approaching or entering areas near the country's border with Ukraine. However, in those earlier incidents, the aircraft followed the drones until they changed course or disappeared from radar. Until this incident on July 24, there had been no publicly known case of a Romanian F-16 using its weapons to destroy a drone that had entered the country's airspace. And that's it for the main headlines this week. We will now move to the next.
Yeah, and the next segment, that would be me. Hello, guys. As always, I will now present this week's, not this week's, but the news from the past 2 weeks. And in this stream, it's actually just the news from this week. We are starting with a donation of 4 vehicles by Germany's Federal Agency for Technical Relief, THW, to the Kherson Oblast. I reported on about on Tuesday. The vehicles are due to assist various municipal services in Kherson with their duties shortly and are part of a bigger batch of 12 vehicles total, of which the first 8 had already been delivered in June. On the same day, Germany's Federal Agency for Technical Relief, THW, has delivered a MAN lorry crane manipulator to Mykolaiv to enable loading and installation work, as well as the clearance of rubble and the restoration of damaged structures. The day after, I reported that Germany's Federal Agency for Technical Relief, I know they really do a lot, has donated 12 Mitsubishi pickup trucks and 2 HEM road rollers to the Kharkiv region. The vehicles will be used for rapid response to emergencies, delivery of humanitarian aid, evacuation of the civilian population, surveying of territories, as well as emergency restoration work and repairs to damaged roads infrastructure. The Kharkiv Regional State Administration and the charitable organization Coordination Humanitarian Center have assisted the delivery. On Wednesday, same day, I reported that the THW, again the THW, has donated several high-power generators to medical and education institutions originated in the Luhansk region. The generators were donated to mainly relocated institutions, for example, in Kyiv. Assistance was provided by the Ukraine in Our Hands charitable foundation. And the last news item on the same day, the German Spiegel reported following a visit to their facility in Ukraine that Stark Defense has been contracted by the German government to deliver an unknown amount of Virtus loitering munitions to Ukraine. And now it's time to make Joseph happy and show you guys an interesting video of German delivered equipment, which he always wants me to do. The 2nd Unmanned Systems Battalion of the 59th Assault Brigade has published new strikes on Russian targets like an SPG and an MRS, utilizing HX-2 loitering munitions, of which Ukraine has received several thousand financed by the German government. Yeah, and that's it. So back to you, Joseph.
Thanks, man. Cool video. So up next, we've got Stanimir's report on the Russian economy for the week. Stanimir, over to you.
Thanks. We'll start with the usual tanker traffic, which we have for this week. So in Ustluga, there was a lot of adjustment when it comes to the oil products and the crude oil exports. They were down to 1.2 million barrels for the crude oil. That's closer to what we expect from this site, but still it's high from them. Oil products, only one of the 3 ships we had last week actually shipped, so they are still going to be transferred to this week. And so the adjusted oil products dropped to below 0.05 million barrels a day, so basically just 1 ship. When it comes to the LPG, one of the ships didn't ship, and we're down to just 0.136 million barrels a day. As I said, I expect soon these deliveries either to be redirected to St. Petersburg or to be stopped altogether. They might have to be redirected because Ustluga can't actually ship things back in reverse from its gas condensate plant. So we might see these shipping to a Russian port. And when it comes to this week, the oil shipments actually increased drastically to almost 1.7 million barrels a day. We expect some of these to actually not ship this week. So that would be a reduction in the next adjustment, but also because refining capacity has been knocked out, you should see more crude oil being shipped from this site, and also maybe redirect some of the crude oil that was going to the Black Sea via Novorossiysk. We're going to see it redirected elsewhere if they can, because shipments there were suspended by the end of the week. When it comes to oil products, because a lot of ships scattered around, it's relatively normal for this site at 0.3 million barrels per day almost. And when it comes to LPG, it's a bit high at 1.3 million barrels a day. But again, this is something that I expect to change. When it comes to Primorsk, we had a bare adjustment. 1 ship didn't leave, but again, the adjusted shipments was 1.6 million barrels a day, a bit over that, so that's high for the site. And when it comes to this week, it's at 1.2 million barrels a day when it comes to crude oil. That is relatively what we expect if you reduce our estimates by 10%, because we go by raw deadweight tonnage. And for oil products, there was just 1 ship that actually loaded and shipped. So it's again low for the site, but we expect it to be low because right now diesel, jet fuel, and gasoline exports are completely banned for Russia, so oil products shipments are going to be very low. They're left with mostly mazut that they're exporting. And finally, the Novorossiysk site, we had 1 adjustment when it comes to the shipments of oil products. One ship left this week instead of last week. And like I said, we're going to see a reduction in the number of ships that loaded. There was just one likely CPC ship and just 4 ships that loaded from Novorossiysk. CPC is also going to stop shipments. They announced that on, I think, July the 19th, because, or July the 20th. Let me check. Basically, because of strikes on July the 17th and 19th by Ukrainian drones, they're also stopping the shipments. The Caspian Pipeline Consortium is mostly Kazakh oil, over 80% sometimes, though in last year it was closer to 65%. So it's not just Kazakh oil, it has some Russian oil inserted in it, but basically Kazakhstan is closing it down because Ukraine is also striking their ships. So we're probably going to expect some agreement where ships that are shipping Kazakh oil and Kazakh oil exclusively, they're going to be probably let pass and ship from that site, and Russian ships that go to Novorossiysk and the other terminal there will probably stop going there entirely because of the drone threat from Ukraine. And I think that's what pushed the president of Kazakhstan in his meeting with Putin to actually tell him to end the war, because it seems pointless to him. And basically because this is the main way Kazakhstan exports oil, it's going to hurt them a lot in the next few months if this continues to happen. So beyond that, we have the big strikes on wild berries. This is just have to say that I got the wrong map. Actually, the number of people that were left unemployed is closer to 40,000. So the strike success rate of Ukraine is closer to 50% because we've seen a lot more facilities being attacked. The estimated damage that would require to be spent to rebuild the warehouses, we estimated at around 60 billion rubles. And we said earlier around 40,000 people or more will probably be left without jobs. The reason we're saying 40,000 is because we have low estimates for some of these sites. For Nevinomynsk, we have only the initial statement by the local government on how many people they're going to employ and how many jobs they're going to create. And for Shushery in St. Petersburg, we have the shift number from the time the strike, site caught on fire in 2024. And there we have 2 different estimates for the number of people who are on site, between 1,200 and 1,600. So that's how we got to our estimate. But after that fire, the site was further expanded, and also it included probably more people working because of the time of the fire. It was illegal to operate the site because it hadn't received its legal permit. So that's why I expect probably the numbers we're talking about in terms of the jobs lost is probably closer to 45,000, 50,000 people lost their jobs just in the warehouses that were destroyed. And when it comes to wild berries operations, we have data on what's happening to some of their customers. When it comes to Belarus, they've been waiting for a week for deliveries. In Crimea, they've lost all coverage on the app, and there's no ability to order anything in Crimea. There, the site was also destroyed. In southern Russia, which was serviced by the warehouses in Stavropol, Nevinomynsk, and in Krasnodar, pickup points aren't getting anything delivered. So these are private businesses which rely on goods coming in for revenue. And they have even started asking the government to provide financial support for them until things normalize, although I don't think things will normalize over the next 12 months. So for the time being, those sites will probably have to be serviced by another center, and they would have to wait for a food truck. Basically, they haven't received any new deliveries for a while, and these are businesses that are separate, operate entirely at their own costs, and are also having to pay fines to Wildberries. So we might see a lot of closures of such sites in southern Russia if this doesn't improve. And when it comes to the northwestern part of the country, when sellers tried to ship their goods out of warehouses to their own warehouses, they were denied that and were told that they could only do this at the cost of delivering the goods to a pickup point. But all those pickup points were overloaded according to the app because a lot of goods were being sold at fire sale prices, and also a lot of sellers wanted to reclaim their goods at any cost. So that's what's happening for the system as a whole. It's collapsing in certain parts of Russia, and overall it's no longer, I would say, reliable in the places that it was impacted in. Also, when it comes to how Wildberries has treated sellers, so it has effectively blocked them from recovering their goods. It has also blocked them from recovering their funds from the balance of the company. They used to be able to make instant withdrawals. Those are now locked. And the nearest point at which sellers can withdraw funds is in August. So basically for the remainder of the month, they will not be able to withdraw any funds they have from the company. When it comes to what has been promised as repayments, the company said that it will make a simulation and it will use that to determine at what sale price the goods would have sold if they hadn't been destroyed. And then they transferred that to the balance sheets of sellers. But so far, the best payment I've seen is 1/6 of the value of the goods. And again, this is the value of the goods, not the sale price. The usual payments have been up to a few percentages or a fraction of a percent. I've seen 0.2% for one seller. And again, I said none of this can actually be withdrawn from the balance sheet of Wildberries. This is also a problem for sellers because at the end of the month, you have a deadline to pay your taxes. So they would need to withdraw part of the funds to be able to pay their taxes. Something that has also been discussed is deferring the taxes for sellers on Wildberries. But so far, the government hasn't intervened. It also hasn't intervened to protect the sellers from Wildberries, essentially taking them down with the ship by locking their goods in their warehouses, and also by banning them from actually withdrawing funds. And I would point out that Russia officially has a federal anti-monopoly service that is supposed to combat such practices, and it is supposed to protect sellers and buyers from corporations that have gone too far. But in the case of Wildberries, it has a strong backing in the Kremlin. So in its corner, there's the head of the presidential administration, Vino. There's also the first deputy head of the presidential administration, Gromov. There's also the senator from Dagestan and Russian billionaire Suleiman Kerimov. And in the past, the current first deputy prime minister, Manturov, has also been a champion for the company. So this may prevent an intervention from federal agencies to actually stop Wildberries from taking everyone with them. But I don't think even disconnections will help them get Putin to spend trillions to basically be the underwriter of the risk for Wildberries, because the costs are, like I said, in the trillions if they have to bail out all the sellers. So when it comes to company workers, there's another problem for them. They can easily be removed, as the workers at warehouses are usually hired through recruiting companies that are just shells that are used to provide subcontracted labor for Wildberries. So they can just remove the company, and all those tens of thousands of people will actually be gone and will not have any way to get back any of their funds. And for those who think that sellers are embittered when it comes to Ukraine, I would point out that we have videos of sellers crying about how their life keeps getting worse, and they've been filmed for years. And the main reason for this is Ozone and Wildberries, and to some extent Yandex Marketplace. Commissions can already be as high as 60%. So on July 1st, the commission for Wildberries was raised to 48% for sports goods, for example. This was another raise by up to 20% of commissions that came in as a shock to people. They can also force discounts on sellers, and they can also, I have to say that the commission itself also is going to probably include ads for your goods, because otherwise they don't make it to the front page. You would also expect them to take an acquisition fee, and also a transportation fee, and a fee for storing the goods in their warehouses, which is something you must do. So that's how from 48% of a commission, you actually pile up to 60, maybe 70% cost, because advertising costs can go up to 20% of the value of the goods you're selling. And I have to add that when it comes to Chinese sellers, they also have an advantage. The Chinese model to sell on Russian online marketplaces has never been to store quantities of their goods in warehouses in Wildberries. They were shipping them directly as soon as the sale happened. And they used to have a lower commission, which allowed them to cover this logistics cost. They used to have a 10% commission, while other people had 44% commissions. And the other thing is that the other way they worked is by selling goods directly to Russian sellers who kept their stocks in Wildberries. And that's how they exited the market as soon as they made a sale. So right now, the Chinese sellers are in a position to flood the Russian market through other marketplaces because the Wildberries sellers have been wiped out. In terms of how likely Wildberries is to collapse and what further exposure is going to happen to the Russian market, we have news from the Bell that the company has a total debt of 1.3 trillion rubles. I'm going to point out that the net profit of Wildberries for 2025 was just 175 billion rubles, and most of that was from fines for pickup points. So 500 billion of that is directly from the Russian state bank VTB. VTB is also in a partnership with Wildberries and aims to acquire 5% of the company's fintech assets. It has already acquired 5% of Wildberries Bank. Wildberries also has a microfinancing company that also loans people microfinancing loans, and they have other financial companies like an insurer, a brokerage. So there's something to acquire there. And the other part is that Ozone, which is much more than Wildberries, but as its nearest competitor, and unlike them, is a publicly traded company, so their shares dropped by 15% over the last 2 weeks. And that's important as at the end of June, the largest owner of Ozone stock, Africa Sistema, actually used 320 billion rubles in Ozone stock as a collateral for a large loan from VTB. So what you can say basically is that VTB's exposure to this part of the e-commerce market is nearing 1 trillion rubles. And the company also didn't have the money to actually subsidize such an investment. So what it tried to do was issue new stock. And the price at which it hoped to sell this new stock in the near future was 87 rubles per share. But at the current moment, the price of its stock has actually dropped to 57 rubles per share. So this is having a contagion, not just inside the e-commerce sector, not just sellers' pickup points. This is also impacting banks. And I have to point out that when it comes to liquidity out of the largest 10 Russian banks, VTB is usually the worst performing one in terms of liquidity. So the other thing that happened this week as a major news was that the Russian central bank lowered the interest rate from 14.25% to 14%. According to the Russian central bank, Governor Nabiulina, the increase in the fuel prices also started to affect the price of other goods and services on the market. So that raises the option of increasing the interest rate in a future meeting rather than decreasing it. But given that Putin recently said publicly that the interest rate has to be lowered further, the only thing that she can realistically do is probably lower it by even smaller increments, by 0.1%, for example, as a way to keep the interest rate high, but also reduce it somewhat. And next we have the Russian gasoline market and the fuel market as a whole. So we have news that the Russian government is going to introduce subsidies for the import of diesel and gasoline. And we've already learned the intricacies of the subsidies for gasoline. These will likely be 260% higher than the domestic ones for gasoline producers, because they're going to be going off the Indian price of gasoline, which in June for A92 gasoline was 112,000 rubles. So on average, the Russian government is going to pay 15,440 rubles for domestic producers like refineries, and for importers, they're going to pay something like 55,000 rubles. And the government is also considering extending the ban on the export of gasoline until at least January 2027. So the improvement in some places in Russia doesn't mean that the government actually thinks that the situation has improved. We also found out that some of the refineries that were hit earlier by Ukraine have actually returned to selling on Spimex. However, we're talking only about refineries with a total of 40 million tons of refining capacity. And in this case, we don't know if they're fully operational or if they're just partially operational and shipping part of the required capacity. So basically, you can have just 1/3 of the refinery still working, and that would still mean that it's actually shipping to Spimex. And I have to say that when it comes to refineries that are knocked out, we still have, for certain refineries with a capacity of 45 million tons that are still not operating and not offering anything on Spimex at all. So for certain sales of gasoline, what they did was they introduced price increases up to 5% on Spimex this week, sort of as a way to revive trading on Spimex because they have almost completely killed it. And Spimex, which is a commodities exchange, actually started downsizing its staff because it didn't have enough revenue to actually keep them employed. This led to A95 prices spiking to over 80,000 rubles. They had stayed for a while at 70,000 rubles. But in another move to actually gut the domestic free fuel trading market, the Russian government is now planning to reduce the amount refineries are forced to sell on Spimex to just 2%. This is down from the current 10%, and it was further decreased from the 15% it was in May. And in practice, last week, sales volumes were still very low when it comes to gasoline sales, to a bit over 10,000 tons a day, or less than 10% of daily consumption in Russia for gasoline at this point in the year. So what happened was that when it comes to demand, they managed to only cover 18.1% of the solvent demand. So buyers with actual cash who wanted to buy fuel, 80% of them basically couldn't. In another move this week that the Russian government is trying to force on farmers, the Ministry of Agriculture is proposing quotas for regions when it comes to diesel. So they don't have enough fuel for the harvest, and they're admitting it in this way that some regions will be prioritized while others would not get enough fuel. We already know that that's the case, for example, in Krasnodar Krai, which isn't getting enough fuel when it comes to the harvest. And this was followed by an even more bizarre request where the Russian Ministry of Energy asked the Russian Agricultural Ministry to ask Russian farmers if they would accept diesel fuel with 0.3 to 0.9 sulfur content, that is 0.3 to 0.9% sulfur content, or if they would be willing to run their equipment on heating oil instead of diesel. Basically, this means that Russian farmers are asked to use Euro 2 or even worse fuel. And most Russian farmers have modern equipment with modern engines, which would be completely wrecked by such fuel. But it seems that the Russian government, in the form of the Russian Ministry of Energy, only has this to offer as additional fuel deliveries. Only farmers which were aligned to this point on Soviet equipment may probably take advantage of this, but I don't think there's many of those still left in Russia. When it comes to the gasoline shortage as a whole and the fuel shortage, in parts of Western Russia, things improved significantly. So we're talking here Moscow and St. Petersburg, but in places in the south where fuel depots continued to be hit, there were big queues right after they were hit, and queues remained. East of the Urals, the only noticeable increase was in terms of gasoline availability was in Irkutsk, but this was because of Putin's visit, and in a way, they did a Potemkin operation to the point that they lowered prices for fuel to 68 rubles per liter and provided the region with enough fuel so that it wouldn't have any queues anywhere, and at a low price subsidized by the government. But when it comes to Russia's third largest city, which is Novosibirsk and the region around it, it continued to have a crippling shortage by comparison. In Kyiv region, they also have severe fuel issues, and in Kursk, which is closer to Ukraine, over a third of gas stations have actually closed down. In Mariel's capital of Yoshkar-Ola, volunteers are actually staying day and night at gas stations to impose order because otherwise it's collapsing, and they still have big queues. And Pskov is one of the regions which is in the western part, which actually hasn't seen any improvements. Tyumen, which was attacked recently, I think yesterday, it had to introduce a special schedule for gas stations to refuel emergency vehicles. And after the strike by Ukraine on their refinery, the fuel availability got a lot worse with a lot of queues forming up. In Krasnoyarsk, which is still further east in Siberia, local fuel companies have actually been sued for failing to supply firefighters with enough fuel. And in Vladimir region, which is in the west, 5 hospitals have failed finding sellers of fuel for their fuel tenders, including the main ER hospital in the region. And when it comes to disruptions, they managed to reach the front, actually. When it comes to gasoline delivery, Russian units have actually reported that they started to have rationing with 20 liters per day limits. This is for the use of personal cars and generators, on which a lot of Russian logistics actually relies at the front. And when it comes to southern parts of the front in Zaporizhia, the fuel allowance dropped to even further to just 15 liters per day, suggesting that Ukraine's logistics strike campaign has actually started to really limit fuel deliveries when it comes to gasoline to that part of the front. Because, like I said, when it comes to personal stuff they buy, bikes, cars, and that stuff, and generators, they're relying mostly on gasoline and not on diesel, which they can actually get more readily. On the EV front, Rosatom, which is the country's nuclear power plant operator, said that its electrical vehicle charging stations saw a 23% increase in usage in the first half of 2026. And in July, when compared to early June this year, there was a 60% increase. Another interesting thing that happened this week, and we'll have more to talk about it next week, is that Rosaviatsia, which is Russia's federal aviation, civilian aviation authority, it introduced a flight ceiling over Moscow and Moscow region and the area surrounded of 4,900 meters. And this is as a direct attempt to combat drone attacks that have been happening on the city. And this will be in effect at least until August 12th. And like I said, we'll have Brian, our contributor, to explain more why this is a crazy move. When it comes to banking, in June, Russian banks issued 1.22 million new credit cards. This is 19.9% higher than in June 2025, but also 4.2% lower than in May 2026, which suggests that the revival of the Russian credit card market has maybe peaked, and from here on out, it's going to be higher than in 2025, but to a lesser degree. When it comes to commodities and metals, we had the net profit of Severstal for the first half of 2026 released. It decreased by 89% to 4.2 billion rubles, and the revenue of the company also dropped by 14% to 314 billion rubles. Its EBITDA also was down 46% to 42.34 billion rubles, and the company, as a result of that, actually decided not to pay dividends for the second quarter of 2026, as it was also running a negative cash flow of around 29.8 billion rubles in the first quarter of 2026. When it comes to grain, Russian wheat exports in July of 2026 were the lowest they have been since 2017. This is according to data from Sofaecon, and they fell to 1.5 million tons, largely due to the closure of the Azov Sea by Ukraine. This is where a lot of the shipping that came from the shallow ports on the Don and the Volga would go through. And if you have satellite images, you would see neat lines of ships that are waiting in the Don estuary and along the ports. However, that has to be said as last year's story, And this year, the more important thing is that if they are going to actually be able to harvest what they have sown. And as we know already, they're having problem providing enough diesel and gasoline to farmers as it is. When it comes to coal, Russian coking coal prices on the domestic market in July alone rose by 21 to 31%, and by 16 to 20% in the key metallurgical regions for exports due to demand from India and China. Prices are up year over year in July by 57.6% in the Far Eastern ports, which are closer, and by 25.8% in the Gulf of Finland. Like I said, we expect the Black Sea to be closed for shipping soon. And the reason for the price increase, as was said by Russian market insiders, is the overall shortage of fuel in Russia and on the global market. There are not expectations, however, that these prices will remain as high or grow further. This is because Russian steel demand remains very weak. Steel demand at the first half of 2026 dropped by 7.5%. In the second quarter, it slightly revived so that it dropped by just 3.5%, but this is on top of 2 other years of sales decrease. And the better results in the second quarter will link to a slight revival in construction and infrastructure spending by the Russian government. But by the third quarter, we expected that the price growth will stop and will actually reverse because, for example, in July and August, they're going to hold furnaces for repairs and maintenance. So those are relatively weak months when it comes to metallurgical coal. When it comes to oil and gas, the French oil company TotalEnergies has confirmed that it's looking for a way to get out of Arctic LNG 2 project that's been sanctioned by the US, even though by the UK and the EU, I think, even though secretly is actually shipping LNG to China. One of its tankers was actually intercepted and burned down because of an attack by Ukrainian drones in the Mediterranean. But basically, TotalEnergies has 10% share, 10% of the project in terms of ownership, and is now looking for a buyer for that 10% share so it can exit Russia. When it comes to construction, the commissioning of 46.4% of warehouse facilities that were currently under construction in Moscow and were supposed to be finished this year are actually going to be shifted to completion in 2027, and this represents a total of 2.6 million square meters. This is due to a decrease in demand that had already started, although if Wildberries gets funding for the government, maybe it's going to actually buy some of those warehouses in that warehouse space that currently doesn't have any buyers for it. But I don't think the Russian government is going to spend trillions on Wildberries, like I said. When it comes to interesting data points, we have a few this week. First, Kamaz managed to lower its loss for the first half of 2026 by 33.4% to just 13.9 billion rubles. Revenue remained virtually unchanged at 127.2 billion rubles. That's relatively good for the company because the truck market shrunk, which means they stayed at the same place. But that means at the same place where they're still not making any money. And the plant attributes this to a 5.6% increase in productivity, which means that they're basically confirming that they fired a lot of people in the first half of 2026 to reduce their costs for operating the plant. Next, when it comes to more international news, Rossellkhovnadzor is going to introduce a ban on the import of dairy products from Armenia. This ban will go into effect from July 27, 2026. And basically, this is another way to punish Armenia for voting differently from what Putin wanted in the most recent elections. And they're basically closing markets that Armenia used to have in Russia through government decree. When it comes to co-working spaces, so over the last 12 months, the share of vacancies in those in Moscow specifically rose from 4.9% to 17.9%. And this is because there's limited demand, and year-over-year prices for renting these co-working spaces actually rose by 30.4% because Moscow still has some of the most expensive office space in Russia as a whole. And the final interesting data point from this is that in the first half of 2026, the number of companies in Russia registered to do funeral services increased by 22.5% more than in the first half of 2025, up to 995 companies. But I have to point out that this is due to the fragmentation of bigger companies and more companies exiting the gray market of funeral services, where they were doing things unofficially and actually not being a company that was designed to do funeral services and avoiding some taxes being paid that way. Now, for the final part, when it comes to Russia official inflation for the period of the 14th to the 20th of July, it was still high at 0.17%. For July, the inflation so far is 0.6%, and for 2026 so far, it's 4.82%, which is ahead of the central bank's target for the year as a whole. And officially, gasoline prices were up 1.66%, and diesel prices were up 1.87%. What we know is that they're probably up for July by 20 to 30% overall in terms of median prices that you can find. And finally, the debt auction that was going to be held this week was also canceled because all debt auctions of fixed coupon issues of Russian debt have actually has actually been canceled by the Russian Ministry of Finance until further notice. However, what they did this week is they registered 2 floating rate bond issues that have a combined value of 1.5 trillion rubles. So this may be what they try to sell in one big auction, and that's how they're probably going to close the gap of 1.5 trillion rubles in terms of their shortage of funds for the third quarter of 2026. And that's it for me for this week.
Oh, wow, that was a long report, Stanimir. Thank you so much. Do we have Joseph here still?
Sorry, what did you say something to me, Erlend?
I wondered if you're still here. Stanimir is done with his report, so normally you take over then. But
Yeah, sorry.
Well, do you think Wildberries is going to survive, Stan? That's kind of my question after this.
I'm going to say probably no, because we haven't seen strikes on their warehouses stop. Additionally, they deleted their SVO section for the special military operation for the war, but you can still go on there and go to the old sellers that were selling military or dual purpose goods, and you can still find them and buy them. So they haven't actually cleaned up the warehouse as it is. There's a lot of bad blood when it comes to sellers that have been completely wiped out because of the company trying to keep them locked into their ecosystem regardless of what's happening. So basically it's a death right and everyone's invited and can't leave. So that's not going to be something that was going to help their reputation in the future. The only way I see them actually surviving this is if Rosgosstrach, the state insurance company, starts underwriting all warehouse drone attack risk and offers very cheap insurance, and the government steps in to provide 1 trillion rubles to help sellers who've been wiped out in the last attacks. I would probably be very happy if they decide to do that, because that would mean that the Russian government has voted to commit financial suicide. But basically, without heavy support from the government and making the state insurer an underwriter of very cheap insurance for drone attacks and war-related attacks, I don't see that happening. And like I said, they have costs just to rebuild their current operation, just to get to the point they were on July 17th, probably close to their entire profit margin for 2025. And on top of that, we have to mention that Wildberries moves, I think, 5 or 6 trillion rubles in goods a year. So if it basically lost 1 trillion rubles worth of goods in sellers' goods, and that's basically 20% of the revenue on which they were going to have a commission gone. And they have to build up the inventory now with sellers who no longer probably wish to be tied in a big warehouse. And that's proven to be very flammable.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is obviously a very interesting development of the war. And personally, I think there are a couple of reasons for why we haven't seen attacks on the Wildberries facilities before. But I thought maybe if the panel had some comments onto that, I would let the panel give their statements about why do you think Ukraine have attacked these facilities before.
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in. I think there's like two layers to it. The first is obviously like a capability layer. I think probably up until now, Ukraine had a serious like bottleneck when it came to long range munitions, and they could only target certain things that were really high priority, probably like radars and stuff like that took priority over this stuff. But now Ukraine is able to produce long range munitions in such quantities that they can pick other targets like this. I think the second side of it, and I don't think one side is more important than the other. I think they're both kind of important. But the other side of it is that the Wildberries itself has been increasingly integrating itself into the Russian military machine. They had a section on the website called "Everything for the SVO," right? The special military operation, and it was actively supplying Russian military forces with all kinds of stuff that they needed. So this, I think, is a very clear signal from Ukraine. Like, if you're going to be striking Nova Pochta every week and using this, network for military reasons, then, we're going to strike it and either cut it out or, that will continue to cause damage to it. I think that's kind of the message here. But those are just my thoughts on it.
I'm going to jump in quickly to answer a question which someone asked. Do you think Ukraine will attack all zone facilities too? I have to point out that in Ukhtiny Zavodi, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it correctly, but basically the site where they rented 18,000 square meters in Leningrad region, that site also contained an ozone facility that was also rented. So basically, they've attacked ozone and actually have destroyed an ozone facility in the process in that part of the big warehouse that they attacked. Something that I didn't mention is another reason why sellers might not be jumping quickly to ozone as an alternative is that ozone's commissions are even higher than Wildberries, something like 15% higher on average.
Yeah, so to continue off on Joseph there, I think also there's a third motive for why we're seeing this now, and I agree with Joseph's points, obviously, but I think also Ukraine's long-range campaign has been going on for quite some time now, and obviously escalated in both type of targets and volume. And these attacks, I believe, 1 year ago would have been seen as quite politically problematic for Kyiv, because there's been obviously an immense amount of pressure on Ukraine not to attack Russian infrastructure, which we have commented on several times before here. But I think that through the long-range strike campaign that has been majorly aimed at Russian energy facilities and also obviously pure military targets, have been softening up some of the this kind of big fear about long-range strikes into Russia proper. And obviously, expanding those type of targets gradually seems to be, at least to my impression, one of the methods Kyiv has used to avoid, let's say, political backlash. So that's kind of one of the thoughts I've had, and I don't know if you guys agree with that.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I think like your broader point that Ukraine used to rely a lot more on foreign partners for long range munitions, like really effective ones. That meant that they had to be more cautious in what they targeted because they wanted to look like a responsible custodian of those countries' weapon systems, right? They don't want to be striking, the middle of Moscow or something and causing some incident between Russia and this other country. Whereas now they're producing their own, long range munitions, and they're not really accountable in the same way. I don't think they feel as dependent or as accountable to these other countries that have to say about it. I think also the oil infrastructure in particular is a little bit like of a more sensitive issue than this. I don't think, obviously, I do think the Western countries or Ukraine's partners sometimes overdo it on the I don't know, like go easy on Russia. We don't want things to get too bad or they'll freak out, something like that. I think mostly they're afraid of the oil price going up and they're trying to manage like energy prices very carefully. So the oil infrastructure has like a different kind of dimension to it than like a wild berries facility, which doesn't really affect, their interests directly. I'm sure that there are some people clutching their pearls about it. But again, I mean, it seems pretty established that this is like a valid military target if they're just going to supply the Russian military openly and say so on a public forum. But yeah, I think it's broadly accurate, but I think that there probably wouldn't be as much pushback about this. But I think you're definitely right that there's been like a broader mood change in public opinion. Like this thing's gone on so long, and it's been clear that Russia's been targeting things for so long that like no one's really batting an eyelash anymore. There would have been a time, yes, when like people would have gone, "Oh, look at this escalation" or something like that. But we're kind of past that at this point. I do agree with that.
And I want to say something additional that if you were looking at the Russian side of this, initially the message from the start of the week is that yes, it's a big distraction when it comes to wild berries and what it was doing and how important it was. But at least they've shifted to wild berries away from refineries. And by the end of the week, we had a day where the Tyumen refinery was attacked. And at the same time, a wild berries facility was targeted in Yekaterinburg. And that is sort of the point where it seems that Ukraine can target both, even though the attack on the Yekaterinburg facility wasn't as successful. It hit only the parking lot and caused fires there.
And I think also that obviously the fact that major countries in Europe are contributing very heavily to Ukraine's long-range strike program, and kind of has that aid has been cemented now. It's been going on for a couple of years, but expanded really during the last year. One of those countries being Germany, obviously. It's a sign that Europe is way more the approval rate of these strikes going into certain types of targets in Russia has probably shifted dramatically, because 1.5 years ago, I think there would be outrage if we saw these kind of strikes, and not with good reason, in my opinion. Even though the section of the SVO on Wildberries site maybe wasn't there a year and a half ago, they were definitely delivering stuff to the Russian military, and I think they've been doing that for more than 3 years, as far as I remember.
Yeah, and I think my takeaway from Stanimir is that even though I think that's kind of why Ukraine's doing this, this is actually like pretty serious for Russia. Like Wildberries is a really important company. It's part of the reason that the Russian economy has been like it's responsible for a lot of growth in the Russian economy, and I would say it's one of the few companies in Russia that isn't like some like legacy oligarch outfit. You know what I mean? Like it's actually doing something like different and more modern in the Russian economy. And these strikes are like causing, I wouldn't say irreparable damage, but like really, really painful damage to this company. And yeah, we're talking about like 50,000 jobs. And then like, I don't know, imagine if Amazon went down in like any Western country, like people would freak out. It'd be a big deal. So, I mean, it's having a much broader implication on Russian society and the economy than I think like a lot of people are giving it credit for. But I don't know.
I would point out that, for example, Wildberries was something like between 3 and 5% of the Russian GDP in terms of how much volume of goods it was carrying, and that the strikes are already verging. So basically, if 2 more strikes were successful from the ones that happened, they would already be toast. But I still would point out that currently this e-commerce market is in question in Russia, because also ozone has been struck, even if it was just a collateral from another strike. But everyone is now fearful from taking part in this, and they might have to revert back, as you said last week, to go back 20 years in time to a previous commerce model and retail model.
And I think obviously these strikes will have, and also if the whole operation ceases, it will have massive implication to general logistics in Russia, which will definitely have collateral effects on the economy. So this isn't just one, operation against the actual logistics that is supporting the Russian military. It will definitely impact way wider, and that's why I assume that 1.5 years ago that would be seen as quite an overstep compared to what Ukraine had been asked by European partners to do. But I'm very happy to see these strikes, of course, because I think Ukraine is definitely in its right to do it. Obviously, there are proofs and quite evident proof that the company has done quite a lot of effort to supply the Russian military.
You're not allowed to become Russian Amazon without doing Putin some favors, I think, right?
And I see that there is a comment in the chat saying that attacking civilian infrastructure, not directly supporting the military, is a breach of the Geneva Convention, regardless of the site, and that is incorrect. That depends very much on the circumstance. In every case, there is an evaluation that has to be done. If that said civilian infrastructure even indirectly supports the military of the aggressor part, it is not in breach of the Geneva Convention. It's just not as straight cut as that comment implies. It is basically down to the detail of every single strike and what it what the military reasoning for it needs to justify obviously the attack. So yeah.
Yeah, I'd say it's military law is like a big subject, and it's really complicated. It's a lot more complicated, I think, than a lot of people think. And I'm certainly not an expert in it. I'm sure Erlend has at least had to sit through classes on it, I think. So we should probably listen to his opinion. But yeah, it's a big, complicated topic, and it's totally understandable that people kind of do their best to grasp it because it's really important. But yeah, it's like, I don't know. Often I find that my assumptions about it are incorrect, and it's not that I was wrong, but it's like that it was more complicated than I was describing. So I would urge people to, like, I don't know, be cautious and like try to do some research and understand stuff about military law if you want to talk about, like, I don't know.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I just want to emphasize I'm not an expert, but I want to state that it's definitely not as clear cut as that comment states. And every single case will have arguments for and against. These things have some obviously praxis law, so that there are example of verdicts in international court that are being used as example, but unfortunately a lot of those are so outdated for this war that it's very difficult to judge every single case, that if it's clear cut a violation of the Geneva Convention or not. There are some cases that are very clearly, but these strikes on infrastructure, I would say that it will be up to coming verdicts to decide if there will be any.
Yeah, I don't remember the specifics of it, but I remember a few months ago, like I was just trying to make one small point about like military, like these laws of war, and like I went down this huge rabbit hole. It took me hours and hours and hours just to research it, and there were like 3 different cases. They all contradicted each other slightly. I mean, I don't know, it's great. There's a reason like these types of lawyers in international law are like it's some of the most difficult stuff there is in that field. Okay, so I think there's just like, I don't know, a couple more things. The first thing is, I believe there was like a strike in the Caspian Sea. Am I right about that? I haven't really looked into it too much.
Yes.
Strike the Caspian. Yeah. So I don't know. There's a little bit of like people talking about it, like, oh, this is escalation with Iran. But I don't know. I don't think much will come of it. The Iranians already sent military advisors directly to Russia, and they were helping the Russians like launch Shaheeds into Ukraine. So I'm sure the Iranians and various people on the internet will hem and haw about it, but personally, I don't see it as resulting in a significant escalation in what's going on. I think Ukraine probably identified a valid target again, and they exercised defense on it, and that'll probably be the end of it. But does anyone else have a different opinion?
Well, I have to point out that if, and it's probably going to be this way, if the Sea of Azov is closed and the Black Sea is closed for Russian goods, we're talking about, for example, steel and grain, the Caspian Sea becomes one place where they can export them and ship them to another customer. For example, they've been shipping a lot of steel because Turkish prices are low. They've been shipping it to Iran because Iran's own facilities have been damaged in the war, and their production is down in terms of steel. So Russia has been shipping steel at high prices to Iran to take advantage of that situation. If that avenue of exports is closed, like the Sea of Azov and the Black Sea, that will further damage the Russian economy, because that's their only remaining major sea lane to export things, even though that's not really a major sea or major body of water, at least for the south. Because, for example, some of the things like grain from Rostov and Krasnodar and Stavropol, you can't easily redirect up north to the Baltic coast.
It's also a very good point that Ukraine's trying to affect Russia's ability to export things regardless. Cool. So yeah, that was that. And then so I've got a bit of a longer topic here. You guys are obviously free to weigh in, but I find when I have to deal with like the messiness of Ukrainian politics, the panel doesn't have a lot to say. It's understandable. So I'll just start my ramble by saying I've done my best to like distill this down. I don't have any like special knowledge of this. I'm just a guy who reads news reports. I try to read, the Ukrainian media and, the credible Western media reports on this stuff. And I've done my best to like boil it down to something. But, these are sort of my opinions, but I don't really have a strong opinion on this stuff. Like I don't have strong feelings about the characters involved or anything like that. I'm just a guy reading media reports and trying to like, there's different things that the different ones say, and I'm trying to like triangulate it all together. So obviously there's some editorial license in there, but I'm doing my best to kind of keep my opinions out of it. So let's start with the current situation. I think I've already, covered the broad strokes last week. There was what was supposed to be kind of according to the president, a pretty routine like cabinet reshuffle is what we call it. And that's the result of the president having enough votes. He can kind of announce that, and then in Parliament they'll like agree to it, and then it'll happen. So that's what happened. As a result, some jobs were said to be shoveled around. The important one was the defense minister. He said, I'm going to put a different defense minister in. And as a result, people were pretty upset by that. And it kind of like emerged that the reason this was happening was there was a dispute between the chief of the general staff, and a lot of the media reports call him the commander-in-chief. It's complicated in Ukraine. But that there was a conflict between basically the military side and the civilian, like military side. The Ministry of Defense office is like the civilian side. They handle like procurement and contracts and things like that. And then the chief of staff is the head military guy, right? And they're supposed to like work together. And basically there was like an impasse between the two of them. And they were basically telling the president both like the other guy needs to go. But then finally the chief of staff, the military guy, Syrskyi, said either the defense minister Fedorov goes or I go. And so Zelensky triggered this reshuffle. And this appears to have been the main reason for it, at least like according to, kind of Zelensky's own account of it. So this resulted in a big backlash. I would say Ukrainian civil society views this matter as like a sort of an issue where Syrskyi represents kind of the old guard and the old way of doing things. And, that means like kind of keeping things a little closed and centralized and things like that. And a lot of people view that method as kind of corrupt. And Syrskyi is kind of viewed as like, I don't know, like aligned with that whole group. And then Fedorov is viewed as like a young, kind of reform-minded guy, background in technology. He used to be the Minister of Digital Transformation. So I would say people out of a desire to reform the military, and the reason they want to reform the military is obviously so that it's more effective. The Ukrainian civil society fully backed Fedorov in this matter, I would say. And as a result, the Ukrainian parliament also decided that the whole situation was a bit confusing for them. They didn't feel that the president had explained the matter clearly enough. And normally, like, the current makeup of the government, like the president's party, Zelensky's party, the Servant of the People party, is like dominant in parliament. And usually he can get votes for things that he wants. So for them to like push against this and for the president not to have enough votes to confirm his new cabinet is kind of a big deal. So that's where we were last week. We kind of left it off with, we were talking to our Ukrainian colleague Vasyl, and I basically said, well, it sounds like the president's going to try to give him a new job that isn't defense minister, but is maybe symbolic, right? Like the defense minister is the only job that has actual constitutional legal authority in Ukraine to like reform the army, aside from, of course, the general staff. And it's the only civilian job. So any other job, it sounds like, would be symbolic. And Vasyl basically said, well, we trust Fedorov. If Fedorov takes the position, we would assume that, he believes he can make positive change there. So the kind of update on that is Zelensky offered Fedorov a symbolic position and he declined it. So I don't know, like kind of played out the way one would have expected when Zelensky mentioned that he was going to do it. That's basically what people said, that it would be a position that would have no authority. And I think Fedorov was correct to reject it, basically. So that brings us to the new guy, Drapati. I mentioned that, in my news report, that he's the new commander-in-chief. He took Syrskyi's job. So Drapati's the name that was circulated by the people protesting, I would say. That was like, there were maybe 2 or 3 names, but Drapati was like by far the one that people wanted. And he's considered a brave soldier with an excellent record. He made his name in 2014 in Mariupol as the 2nd Battalion Commander of the 72nd Mechanized Brigade. There's a crazy video of him jumping a car with a BMP to like race to deal with the Russian, proxy forces that were in Mariupol. Kind of instantly got a reputation as a hero from that. Became the commander of the 30th Mechanized Brigade after that, known as Good Commander.
During the full-scale invasion, he became the deputy commander of Operational Command South. Basically, he was responsible for the Kherson front, during the most difficult period. Again, considered to have performed admirably there. Deputy chief of, then he became after the Kherson stuff was, Kherson was liberated, he became the deputy chief of the general staff. And that made him responsible for like military training in the military. And then he became the commander of the ground forces. Again, considered a very I would say those are very important key roles. Then I want to say last year, there was an incident. We mentioned it on the broadcast. There was a graduation or some kind of ceremony, and there were a bunch of Ukrainian soldiers all gathered in one spot, and presumably enough information about that gathering leaked to Russian intelligence, and they struck it with a missile, and 50 people plus were injured, and some people lost their lives. A very tragic situation. Drapati himself was not considered directly responsible by the public, but he basically said it happened under my watch, so I need to be held responsible, and he resigned from his position. And I would say, again, I don't have a strong opinion on this, but my reading of the media was that he was viewed as noble for doing that. That most Ukrainian, I shouldn't say, the norm or the thing that was expected would be for him to try to distance himself from it. But instead, he took full responsibility and basically said the military needs to be accountable for things like that, and I'm accountable. And so that increased his reputation even further. Zelensky basically said, well, since I don't blame you for this, I'm going to move you instead to be the commander of the joint forces. My understanding is the joint forces is responsible for coordinating the different branches of the military. There's all kinds of different branches, like the operational and the strategic forces and the ground forces and stuff. So someone's got to coordinate all that stuff. So he was put in charge of that. And that's what he's been up to until Zelensky needed a new commander-in-chief or a new chief of the general staff to replace Syrskyi. And that's, what he's going to do. And I would say that the Ukrainian media and public view Drapati as a very capable officer because of his record, and that he represents a new guard. He doesn't represent the old guard the same way Syrskyi does. He's someone who is young and kind of came up in the fight with Russia, and is reform-minded, I guess, this is how the public views him. So that's Drapati. I think that the only question people have is that can he translate all of these military skills into the chief of staff job, because that's a very political job. There's a reason Syrskyi was Zelensky's guy up until now, right? It's a job that requires a lot of political management, and maybe a guy who's just a soldier who's a hero trying to get the job done is maybe not the best guy to handle all the snakes in King's Landing, right? So that's maybe the one question people have is does his military experience translate to this more administrative and political job? But no one's suggesting that he has a bad record on that stuff. It's just that he's not as tested in those things. So that's the Drapati situation. The next situation is the defense ministry. Right now, a guy named Khmara is the deputy defense minister. Up until now, he was acting head of the SBU, which is Ukraine's domestic counterintelligence, which is something like the American FBI. So Khmara is a major general, and he's a career special operations officer. This is a bit strange as an appointment. Again, it's a temporary appointment, so it's not a permanent thing, but Ukraine's law and constitution explicitly establish civilian leadership of the defense ministry. And they actually the law requires that when they do appoint an actual defense minister, they're not supposed to be in a soldier, right? Or a security officer. It's supposed to be a civilian. So in theory, this guy could get, he could become a civilian. They would just have to discharge him from the military. But it's a strange choice for a defense minister whose job is supposed to be the civilian side of managing the military stuff. To put a defense, a military guy in that position is a bit of a strange choice. So I'm sure he's capable, but that it kind of raises questions as to obviously the president has done this in, I don't want to say under duress, but he didn't have like a pre-made plan for who was going to take this temporary position up. But it's a curious choice, I'll put it that way. So then the next thing that leads us to is the prime minister. It all kind of got glossed over in the shuffle because the actual choice was relatively not controversial. Like, he was accepted as the new prime minister, and also because of all this defense ministry stuff, it kind of got like overshadowed by it. Like if none of that happened, I think this would have been more the story. But the prime minister was part of like dissolving the cabinet is you get a new prime minister. The new prime minister that was chosen is Koretsky. And again, he's like viewed as like a competent manager who is like practical. And like, I don't know, the general opinion of him in the Ukrainian press seems to be positive. He wasn't like rejected, I would say. And this leaves us with Svirdenko. She was largely viewed as a competent prime minister, I would say. Her, I would say, crowning achievement is that she had an extremely successful negotiation with the United States during the mineral deal fiasco. I'm sure you guys have noticed that the United States is, I guess, what could be described as like a schizophrenic negotiation partner right now. They're constantly putting deals on the table that make no sense and like aren't thought out and are confusing to everyone involved. And that's basically what happened with the mineral deal. The president of the United States said, I want Ukraine's minerals or I'm going to sell them out to Russia. And I would say Svirdenko took that and she managed to spin it into gold. She got a very positive deal that resulted, and not just a positive deal on paper, but it's like already in effect. And, the deal basically says, okay, you want our stuff, you can come invest in Ukraine. And that's what some U.S. companies are now doing. So, it's obviously there's still a few questions to be ironed out, but like from the position she was given to the position she was able to maneuver herself into with this mineral deal, I think she did like a really excellent job. And the way the president initially sold this cabinet reshuffle was Svirdenko is so good at her job negotiating with the Americans. I want her to be the ambassador to the United States. And so that's why I got to reshuffle the government. However, since this has happened, since Svirdenko stepped down, and I should mention too, the Ukrainian media said, well, that might be true, but this might be a reshuffle due to the scandal in the energy ministry, right? There was a scandal in the energy ministry. That's why Yermak, who is the president's close advisor, was removed from office. Nobody blames Svirdenko at all for the scandal itself. But there's kind of an implication that like there needs to be someone there who's capable of like preventing things like that from happening and cleaning it up. We need someone a little bit more focused on that versus someone who's really good at deals with the United States at this stage, in things going on. So I don't think anyone like blames her for it, but there's maybe an implication that that's why this is happening versus that they want to just make her ambassador. And the plot further thickened when she refused the ambassador position. I don't know. I think this could be viewed as maybe she's not happy about like how this whole thing is working out. And maybe, I don't know. I don't want to speculate, but it's interesting that the president said he was going to appoint her ambassador and that she then publicly like refused. Like, why wasn't that worked out in private? This kind of undermines Zelensky's whole case for like dissolving the cabinet in the first place. I don't know. It just like leaves a lot of questions, right? And that brings us to Koretsky, which is like my last bullet point here. Koretsky ran Naftogaz and Ukronafta. And again, as I said, he's considered like he ran those ministries very capably. He's a very capable manager. And I think the general idea is like we need someone practical for this late phase in the war who can just like manage all the moving parts and get everything running smoothly so we can like finish this war. And again, as I said, the parliament voted him in overwhelmingly. And so I don't think he's a controversial choice. That seems to be the general consensus. However, if the goal of the president was, in fact, to try to reshuffle the government in response to this like energy ministry scandal, it's again an odd choice because this guy ran two energy like companies in like national energy companies and like energy policy in Ukraine. It's very obvious that he had like run-ins with the people involved in these scandals. And and again, I want to be clear. Same with Sverdenko. No one implicates this guy in any of the like corruption that happened in that scandal. Everyone views him as a competent manager. But my point is just like, if the goal was to like move away from the scandal, it's an odd choice again, because he was kind of like, there, like, I'll put it this way. There is grumbling in the Ukrainian media that he's like in close proximity to this scandal, if not involved in it. So it's if the goal of this reshuffle was to like completely remove all suspicion about this scandal, it's a weird choice. So if the goal was to make Sverdenko the new ambassador to the United States, she has declined that job. And if the goal was to try to like, reshuffle in response to the scandal, I don't think it worked great, because the media is speculating about this, issue with his ties to the energy ministry. So the whole situation's a bit odd, and it all culminates in the fact that the parliament is currently in recess until August 18th. I don't want to say that means that the matter will definitely be postponed for that long, but like they can still call like an emergency session basically. But like, it's a crazy thing to leave this all on the table for that long. Like, Ukraine is in the middle of the war. There's currently an acting foreign minister. There's currently an acting defense minister. And I don't know. It's a really messy situation that I don't know. Like, again, I don't necessarily blame Zelensky's motivations here, or I'm not going to speculate onto like all the facts and stuff, but it feels like this was a pretty momentous shuffle in the Ukrainian government, and the president didn't treat it with like the level of like seriousness that it needed. He didn't like make enough plans. He didn't talk to his own party and make sure he had the votes to do what he wanted to do. He didn't talk to these different cabinet ministers like Fedorov and Sverdenko and say, here's the plan for you moving forward. Are you okay with that? Instead, now they're kind of like breaking ranks publicly and declining his offers. So I don't know, just the whole thing appears to be a big headache for Zelensky. And, I don't envy his position here. He's got to balance a lot of different moving parts. And, his job is to like try to, all these guys are just going to be doing their job, and their job is to focus on their different like lane. And his job is to, of course, manage all those different people who are often arguing with each other about what's the best thing to do and whose lane is in who and stuff. And, it's like, it's not an easy job to balance all that, I'm sure. But I don't know. The president has kind of put himself in a difficult position here, I think, by like not being proactive enough. And I don't know, like this needs to be resolved. You can't just not have a defense minister in wartime. That's my ramble about it. I hope it was useful to you guys. Sorry if it was long. Does anyone else have anything they want to say about all this?
Well, I just wanted to mention that protests are still going on. Actually, right now as well, both in Lviv, Kyiv, Dnipro, Kharkiv, there are protests where the people are demanding Fedorov being reinstated as Minister of Defense. And I think that pretty clearly shows how Zelensky and his advisors have underestimated the popularity of Fedorov and the reforms that he brought. It's not necessarily just about the person Fedorov, but the ideology, which is quite a big shift for how Ukraine is operating its military procurement. And that's been the major thing that Fedorov introduced, has been more transparency and more fair competition between military suppliers. Apparently that has stirred up also quite some discontent within some of the larger companies that have had big contracts with the Ukrainian military, like for instance Firepoint. Allegedly, the one of the main investors, Stilman, was apparently very upset about Fedorov because of the bidding system to long-range strike drones deliveries to the Ukrainian military that Fedorov introduced. Obviously, Firepoint has a very large portion of the long-range strike drones right now. So who knows what that means, if it's true. Are they scared of losing their share? all these kind of things apparently had a big contributing factor to the sacking, which is, in my opinion, very disconcerting, because if companies can basically dictate how who is the Minister of Defense, that's not where Ukraine want to be. And I think in some ways we're in a crossroad situation, similar to when the whole stir up about NABU and SAPO, the anti-corruption agencies, and their independence was put into question by Zelensky, who tried to change the law about their independence, and he had to completely revert his proposal and position on that due to the protests. And I think there's a possibility that we'll see something like that again, because the protests are not getting smaller. Even if Syrskyi was sacked, which was one of the demands of the protesters, we still have thousands of people protesting in the streets, and that's not something that Zelensky can live with forever. There could be a compromise, however. I'm not. I don't know who that would be, but if Zelensky can find a candidate that would continue and have the people's trust that they would continue the same trend, and to reform the military similarly to how Fedorov did, then maybe the protests will die out. But it sounds a little bit unlikely.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think like it kind of has become it's kind of taken on a life of its own, in the sense that I think you're correct that like the protests will continue until Fedorov feels satisfied with the resolution. I think that's kind of the thing that's going on here. And the main issue is, I would say, I wouldn't call it an ego thing, but I think there's like a real issue here of where the president has already like not had this guy's back, right? I don't want to say he betrayed him, but like when the time came and it was time to choose between Syrskyi and Fedorov, Zelensky chose the other guy. And so now for like him to just have to like come back and take his old job, is it possible? Like there's like a trust issue there, basically, right? On the other side of it, though, like just giving Fedorov like a symbolic position, like some kind of new officer of military innovation or whatever job, like there's no constitutional authority there. In order to actually reform the military, like he needs an actual constitutional authority, or the people who are holding up the reforms are just gonna like, ignore him, right? So like that's kind of the fundamental issue here. I think like the president doesn't want to make him defense minister again, because like it seems weird after this whole mess, something like there's not enough trust between them. But at the same time, there's not really another position he can give him that would satisfy people's feelings about, as you were saying, like the issue of reform and like Fedorov's ability to continue reform in the military. So
well,
go ahead.
Fedorov made it quite clear he does not want any other position. He does not accept any other position, because he believes that the only position that makes him capable of doing what he wishes to do, when it comes to the reforms, he's always talking about reforms. That is the Minister of Defense. So he's kind of, given Zelensky an ultimatum here, and I understand why Zelensky is hesitant. Not only about the on the personal level. I think that's not really the big issue. The big issue I would personally see if I was the president in this situation, is that you kind of give up your authority as president to quite a large extent if you accept to revert the decision because of public pressure. And that could also potentially be a little bit dangerous in the situation Ukraine is right now, obviously, which is a full-scale war. So the president has different calculations than just the personal level when it comes to what he will do going forward, and that is severely difficult for him, I think, and that's why I think this miscalculation is so catastrophic.
Yeah, I think you phrased what I was trying to say better. That like there's like a, I don't know, like a hierarchy issue or something. I don't quite know how to phrase it in shorthand, but I think you explained it well. That like this, I don't know. If there has to be a compromise, I think the only thing that's possible at this point would be for Fedorov to handpick someone else that he's comfortable with as like carrying on the reforms. That seems like if there has to be a compromise. Personally, I would like to see Fedorov back. I think that he is the right guy for the job. But if assuming that this issue that we were talking about cannot be overcome, that seems like the only other path forward here. But did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think there are possibilities that he can be reinstated. It depends a lot on the pressure, and I think it also depends on a lot of dynamics in within the parliament, because obviously the president will not be able to appoint another minister of defense without the parliament backing him on a permanent basis, and that I think that probably is going to be the deciding factor in all this, because as it stands now, Zelensky has a position, Fedorov has his position. He has been offered a different role and declined it. The people are protesting and likely will continue to protest. But who can decide? Eventually it's the parliament. They can decide to tell the president, this is our choice. We will go only with Fedorov. You have to approve him, or come up with some alternative, and then we'll see. And I think this is very interesting. I just wanted to say that Fedorov is immensely popular in the military in Ukraine, and one of the reasons for why he is so popular is because the soldiers on the ground have seen real difference on what they receive from just a short time that he was Minister of Defense, what they actually receive on the ground in equipment and daily supplies, because he changed the whole system of how procurement is done. Obviously, there will be people that receive less and people who get less contracts, and that will upset a lot of people. There will be people who lost their positions and their decision-making power because of complete different procurement system, and that will upset a lot of people. And there will also be people out of jobs in companies that traditionally had big contracts with the military. That will also upset a different set of people, and might give some disadvantages to certain people in the military. But overall, soldiers are very happy with Fedorov, and I think that has contaminated to the Ukrainian population. People know that the soldiers are receiving better equipment, more supplies when they need it. That's why they support him.
Yeah, I mean, he made a very clear public case, and I think it's pretty clear to Ukrainians, like, this guy has the right ideas, and he has like a proven track record of like putting them into effect. So yeah, they trust him, they want him back. I think that's pretty clear. And yeah, I think it just comes down to like, it's up to the president now to sort this out. I don't envy his position, but I really hope he makes the right decision here. Personally, I think the right decision is probably putting Fedorov back, and all those other things can be sorted out. I think the trust issue or the hierarchy issue can be sorted out. But yeah, I guess we'll have to see. Any other stuff on this? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that I think that however of a difficult situation this is, because Ukraine is in a full-scale war right now, having protests like this is not really ideal. But it shows that Ukraine is in a healthier place when it comes to its internal politics than many people believe. And the reason why Syrskyi was sacked was because of these protests. He basically had no choice but to sack him anymore, because it was being outed so badly by so many different people from so many different angles people lost the trust in the commander of the Ukrainian armed forces, and it was shown publicly everywhere. And that's, I think, a healthy sign of Ukrainian democracy still being alive and well.
Yeah, it reminds me of an amazing Telegram post I saw in Russian that was something to the effect of like, they just got rid of their Gerasimov. Like, why can't we get rid of our Gerasimov?
I just wanted to state at the same time, and I can't judge Sirski from the position I'm in, except from obviously I can read reports of what people say about him. But during his reign, the Ukrainian military did reform quite a lot. Obviously, that those reforms have been complicated and troublesome. Maybe someone else could have done them better, but eventually he actually did those reforms that had been demanded since before 2022 by a lot of people in the Ukrainian military. So there will be positive effects from his reign as commander-in-chief, and hopefully those issues that were being brought to light will cease to be there. But the time is still to show if those issues will be resolved or not. And we just need to observe and see what's going to happen. But from all what I've heard, Drapati is an excellent commander, and he definitely has more trust within the normal soldier on the ground, and I think that's a positive thing for the Ukrainian armed forces.
I agree. I don't think necessarily Sirski was as bad as Gerasimov, but yeah, I think as you said, there were some positive things, but you know, it's clear now he's lost the trust of the public confidence, and you can't have a person in that position. So I think it was the right decision to remove him at this point. Yep. Anyway, all right, we got to get to questions. So I can actually pull up questions now. Look at me. So someone mentioned usually the commission has closed door meetings with the EU state representatives to get agreement on what will be in the next sanctions package. So things failing at the council level is strange. Yeah, I agree. You know, there's not much more to say about it than that. People were extra pushy with their carve-outs this time around. But, you know, I think that the carve-outs that they got were pretty minimal. So, you know, I think it's broadly a win. Next question, I believe is for you, Mr. Gao. Is Germany the only country that sends such specific technical equipment?
Regarding my segment, no, it is not. I would say that from my observations, right, I follow very specific accounts from oblasts, from heads of military administrations, etc., where I know that a lot of German aid is going through, or where I know that it could be appeared. I would say from my observations, we do the most, but that's just my observations. Could be that in other oblasts, which I'm, for example, not tracking, that other countries do a lot. There are certain countries or certain assistance where I see that other countries also donated. Also other organizations, Norwegian organization Frit Ukraine, for example, I see very regularly with new deliveries and like specialized equipment. I think Lithuania I see from time to time. US aid is still being delivered. I see from time to time also specialized vehicles. Japan is delivering such kind. But from the just amounts, I would say we definitely do the most, but we're not the only one. No.
Yeah, I think it seems like Germany had a lot of programs already with Ukraine when it came to like their local government. Like Ukraine obviously had a legacy of like you know, Soviet rule, and there was like the issue of like having like a little principality having control over their own funding and stuff was like kind of new. And so a lot of German towns like partnered up with Ukrainian towns. And so I don't know, I think you see a lot more like activity on the local level in Germany, and that's kind of notable. But you know, I think other like companies and countries like provide stuff. But as you said, I think the German volume is a bit higher, and that's maybe one of the explanations. But
yeah, and one shouldn't forget that the the amount of funding we have available for humanitarian aid, which is, for example, going through the foreign ministry, but also through other ministries in Germany, like the Ministry for Development, for example, which is very active in terms of providing assistance to the Ukrainian energy sector, etc. pp. That alone the amount of humanitarian aid or funding available for humanitarian aid is higher or is bigger than the overall assistance for a whole year for certain countries. And that's just humanitarian aid from us. So yeah, that might be a good reason or an explanation for why there's always so much for it. I'm not sure if other countries, maybe Erlend can speak to the Norwegian stuff or Colby to the US stuff, but I'm not sure if other countries are like saying we don't want to have that so much on public display, which I wouldn't know why. I mean, it's humanitarian aid, right? But from my perspective, and I also from research and stuff, I know that the German government is very specific when it comes to humanitarian aid to develop certain areas category like decentralized energy infrastructure and the tools and vehicles that come along with that and stuff like this, right? And so maybe that's why in other countries are focusing on stuff which is not that publicly recognizable, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
Well, I just want to say to Norway, like there are quite big humanitarian packages. They're all way more transparent. You can look them up on the Nansen Fund, what is it called, the Nansen Programs webpage, and see which organizations gets what money, and there are regular updates on that. But it just doesn't get as much media attention because the Norwegian government is focusing much more on the military aid, and obviously the military aid is in proportion several times larger than the humanitarian aid.
Yeah, so I guess, like, I don't know, you're partly responsible for making it so well known, Mr. Germinate Ukraine. So we appreciate your work, Tochnyi. I'm sure the audience appreciates it.
Yeah,
All right.
and I just want to add, just want to add that, like, or just like Erlend said, it's not the German government which makes these things public, which is very interesting. If they wouldn't do that, and I wouldn't, write about it, tweet about it, post about it, I don't think a lot of people would actually notice, because neither the THW nor the German government nor anybody else is really, like, from the German official side, is really stating that we're doing so much. I mean, I would say that 9 out of 10 times at least when I post about humanitarian aid donations, I get it from Telegram, from the official accounts, from oblasts, from cities, from administrations and people working for them, and it's really insane. And I really don't know why we're not making such things more public. I mean, it's very, very good assistance, right? It's not about only military assistance, which is made public or not made public. I mean, humanitarian assistance is also very, very important.
Yep. So thanks for your question. Next one is any predictions on how long the bond sales stay down? I assume that's for Stanimir.
Yeah, for now, the predictions are probably for the rest of this quarter. With how things are going, the Russian government bond index is down to below 110 points, I think, and yields are up 2%. So I expect them to stay down and maybe just release floaters that are more attractive to people. If you want to track, I post about the bond market every Wednesday, because that's when usually they make they do their auctions for domestic debt. If you actually want to follow the broader bond market for Russia, I would say follow Rus bonds. They track every bond that's issued by a big Russian corporation and have a piece on it. And I think Prune actually tracks how much they're going to spend on servicing all the new debt they issued after the start of the full-scale invasion. I track from time to time, I post the total amount of funds they have to actually spend on covering the current debt of Russia, which is mostly domestic, but I don't follow to that extent. I just don't have the time lately.
Thank you, Stanimir. There was another question for you, but I lost track of it. It was about, I think, inflation. Do you happen to see it?
I think it was a joke because he said that without goods being sold, there's going to be less inflation. But I will point out that with less goods available to be sold, the remaining goods would be in shorter supply, so their price will increase. That's a partial thing that's going to happen from the destruction of so many goods in so many warehouses.
Yeah, I think we are talking. I don't know if it would be a full percentage point, but we are probably talking about at least a fraction of a percentage point on the actual Russian GDP from all this, which is crazy.
Yeah, $1 trillion gone. And I think the other thing that people are now talking about in Russian circles is the next stage, which is the creditors of these organizations. And like I said, VTB is exposed up to 1 trillion rubles.
Yeah, so I see a lot of discussion about the Fedorov and general like cabinet stuff. Like I don't know, so all healthy discussion. Like I think it's like Ukrainian politics are complicated. There's like a lot of moving parts here. So I think everyone's entitled to their opinion on this stuff. So yeah, I don't know. It's good. It's good, healthy discussion in chat. Does anyone see any other questions they wanted to address?
Yeah, there was a question again about the license of Esther30 and SkyPG, but I think we answered that last week, and I'm not aware of any other updates. So my answer from last week still stands. They pledged to give out a license or to allow Ukraine to produce these missiles, but the pledge is made until the end of the year, so they're still in negotiations, unless they have finished the whole negotiations within a week, of course.
Thanks for that. And while we're on the subject, last week, Colby, I know we talked a little bit about there was an announcement that President Trump made that Ukraine would be allowed to produce Patriots. All I saw this week was like Raytheon said, no, it's real. We're going to do it. But I don't know if there's anything more specific than that. Was there any like update on that?
It is real. I don't know that there's much more specifics that we can say right now. I'll just reiterate that the establishment of PAC-2 GEM-T interceptor production in Ukraine is a long-term endeavor. And so people shouldn't expect this is something that's just going to magically happen overnight, and Ukraine will suddenly be producing these missiles. So it's a long process. They're working through it. I expect we'll see it completed sometime in the future, but again, don't hold your breath on it.
I think you were saying last week the timeline would probably be 5 to 10 years. So yeah, obviously.
I don't know if I said that long, but certainly not a matter of a few months or even like 1 year. I think we're 2 to 4 years is probably a more realistic timeline. If they get it done within 24 months, I would consider that to be a pretty massive success.
I got it. Yeah, sorry, I must have remembered that wrong. So 2 to 4 years. So maybe again, just an estimate. We don't know. I just remember Colby comparing it to another facility that went up, in a given period of time. Cool. Any other questions that we want to address before we close out?
Yeah, since Shaggy Fella asked this twice, I'll try to respond. So as of Sea and Black Sea interdiction finished mainly, or just operational pause. I just wanted to say that I think it's very difficult for us in the OSINT community, and also just by watching the amount of strikes happening in both the Black Sea and the Azov Sea. I think it's going to be very difficult for us to give a judgment of if there is an operational pause or if it's finished. It depends also on the Russians and what they will do, right? So if Ukraine has managed to convey the message to the Russians that if you move in these areas, you will be hit, then maybe the operation was a success, and we will not see any more movement or heavily reduced movement in those areas of operation, which obviously will determine the availability of targets for Ukraine. So it really isn't a question that can be a yes or no or a determined question. I think we will just have to wait and see. But I'm sure that there are other campaigns that are have been planned for a long time that might be starting if that campaign is on a pause or to a halt.
I can actually say something to that effect, and I would say that for the current time being, maybe it's finished because navigation in the Sea of Azov has been blocked by Russian authorities. The Transport Ministry has instituted a ban on ships anchoring and staying in the Sea of Azov away from massive air defense installations. So they basically can only be in the Sea of Azov if they're hugging an air defense site. And when it comes to the Black Sea, navigation during nighttime has been canceled for ships that are operating from the Novorossiysk terminal when it comes to loading oil products and crude oil. And as of the end of the week, I think on Friday, Bloomberg reported that they've actually stopped loading ships at Novorossiysk with oil and oil products. So to a degree, Ukraine has managed to pause traffic in the Sea of Azov and pause loading of Russian crude on ships in Novorossiysk.
It was a big operation Ukraine was doing. So yeah, it looks like it was successful. Cool, guys. So I think we're going to wrap up there. So thanks, of course, to our illustrious panel, everyone for joining in. It's really great to have all this expertise here on the panel. Appreciate it. Mr. Germany to Ukraine, Erlend, Colby, myself, and Stanimir. Thank you, chat, for your questions and your lively discussion. We appreciate you guys coming in, giving us feedback about what you are interested in. It helps us kind of like calibrate our research and measure what people want to know more about. And your questions are always insightful. We appreciate that. And of course, we know not everyone can watch live. If you guys do have any questions, you can leave them in the comments. We do read them. We try to address them on the stream, but often I forget, and it's my fault, and I'm sorry. But we'll try to do better. So do ask your questions, and hopefully they'll get through. If you guys do want to check out more of our work, go to Tochnyi.info. That's our website. There's a lot of people who do research and write articles and stuff and make interactive maps at Tochnyi. There's like lots more people than us that do work there, and a lot of their work appears on the website. So we would really like to point people in that direction. Check it out if you want to know more in-depth information. So I think that about wraps it up. Erlend, did you want to showcase any of our current projects?
Well, maybe if Stan can give a 30-second rundown of what this map represents, which is one of the new features on our website.
Yeah, this map represents using data from Russian banks, which show transactions in terms of purchases at gas stations and what percentage of gas stations no longer have purchases. I would say that if you're looking at the map, beware that some gas stations are not offering cash purchases of gasoline. And also we might have purchases of other goods. So a gas station might be out of gasoline, but actually might still be selling LPG because that is run out in only 4 or 5 regions. But basically that's the reason you would have some underreporting, but use it as a guide for trends. And this is why we're showing now trends, how things are going over the week, which is a great contribution from Constanza. and go to our site and look at the map if you want to have an understanding of how things are going over the months following. We're currently using data only from the largest bank, Sberbank. That has its limitations. So first, the positive is that it controls over 50% of Russian retail banking. So it's represented everywhere, unlike, for example, Tinkoff, which it's other journalists who cover Russia said that and pointed out correctly that Tinkoff is a virtual bank and so basically doesn't have much of a foothold in southern Russia and the Caucasus. But there's also other banking apps we can use, like Alpha Bank, which is Russia's remaining largest private bank. So we can use those apps to actually correlate what's being shown by Sberbank. The problem is, again, Sberbank is a state-owned bank, and it's very tech-savvy, so they might start to introduce noise in the data that looks like things are improving at a gradual pace because they know how to fake these things. But for now, I don't think they're tampering with the data. But yeah, use it more as a guide for trends, but also know that in some places it's very accurate in terms of, for example, Crimea, where gas stations aren't operating really that much. Yeah.
So you can find that and other great maps and articles at Tochnyi.info. So we're going to wrap up there. We hope everyone has a great week. Obviously, I hope Ukraine continues to flex on Russia with these long-range strikes. It's been a great week for that. And yeah, we'll keep everyone updated on what's going on. Slava Ukraini.
Heroim Slava.
On behalf of the brave.